Okay, you guys. So it is Ashley and Angela, and the site that we chose was the Portland Harbor Superfund site. Based on the name, I guess you can tell that it's found in the Portland Harbor, which is in Portland, Oregon. This is within the lower Willamette River between Suavy Island and Swan Island, just in case any of you guys have any concept as to where that is. We have a picture of the harbor also on the slide right there. So the site was caused by prolonged periods of industrial use along the Willamette River. The Portland Harbor has had a long history of shipping, industrial, and commercial activity because of its key location on the Willamette River. Over 80 companies have been key contributors to making this location a Superfund site. These include a few big names that we're pretty used to hearing and seeing around just from like driving around Charlotte in general. But just a couple of these names are Air Liquids America Specialty Gases, that's an LLC, Chevron Texaco Corp, Exxon Mobil Oil Corporation, General Electric Corporation, Shell Oil Company, and even the State of Oregon Department of Transportation. So these have been some key contributors to making this a Superfund site, and they were all sent letters of liability earlier in the 2000s, obviously, for stating that they were responsible for the harbor being contaminated with all of these pollutants and everything. So yeah, a study done in 1997 by the EPA and the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, also known as DEQ, found that river sediments in Portland Harbor and the bed of the lower Willamette River were highly contaminated. So this had a good list of contaminants, and just a few of them, not all of them, because it was a very extensive list, but just a few of them included metals like mercury, tributyl tin. And they also had pesticides like, that we're using in our project this semester, DDT. And they had other hazardous substances such as PCBs, petroleum products, dioxins, and PAHs.
So, based on the study that they did, the EPA proposed that the Portland Harbor, they decided that it should be designated as a Superfund site on July of 2000. So, it's actually been quite a while. And a proposal was actually sent out by the governor at the time, Governor Kitsaber. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but he sent a proposal to the EPA, and it had roles and responsibilities related to the environmental cleanup of the site. And based on this information, the EPA officially designated Portland Harbor as a Superfund site in December or on December 1st of 2000. And the proposed plan to clean up the Superfund site was approved in January of 2017. So there was a long time in between it being declared a Superfund site in December 1st of 2000 and when the cleanup plan was actually proposed in January of 2017. And their proposed plan also includes a 13-year remediation period. So it's going to take quite a while for everything to get settled.
Okay, so for problem formulation, the Oregon Health Authority issued a fish advisory due to the high levels of toxic chemicals that were found within the resident fish of the Portland Harbor. So, in this advisory, they recommended that women of childbearing age, in particular pregnant or breastfeeding women, along with children and people with weakened immune systems, that they should avoid eating the resident fish. Okay, especially carp, bass, and catfish caught between Suavy Island and the Fremont Bridge in the lower Willamette River. Within this area, it's a populous area for low income families as well as minority families, and Based off of this, they won't actually be able to avoid eating the fish in this area, which was one of the biggest problems with this fish advisory, was that this was their main source of food within the area. So they were really hoping to find some other way of getting around the fact that they had to avoid the fish. So people who regularly boat, swim, beachcomb, or work at the former Gasco site of the beach for several years were probably going to be exposed, or more than likely exposed to PAHs at levels that would have increased their risk of developing cancer at some point in their life. It was said that it was unlikely that the beach currently is used for recreational basis, so the people who would be going to the beach now wouldn't be as exposed. But before the advisory, obviously, they were pretty obviously exposed on a regular basis.
So, swallowing or actually touching any of the chemical contaminants in the water, the beach sediment, and the bottom sediment at other beaches, they said it's not likely to harm the health of the people who boat, swim, beachcomb, or do other work within the Portland Harbor Superfund site, but it is still something that they need to be aware of. And the primary pollutants of concern in the Portland Harbor Superfund site are PCBs, and these are commonly found in electrical equipment, oils, and plastics. Other pollutants of concern, which there are quite a few, but some of them include DDTs, which we all know is a common pesticide, dioxins, and these are actually formed when materials like herbicides and paper are made, and also PAHs. And these are produced when products such as coal, oil, gas, wood, garbage, and tobacco are burned. So our assessment endpoint is that the bioaccumulation is occurring within the resident fish of the Portland Harbor in Oregon, and that the resulting biomagnification that is likely going to be seen within the humans that are eating the fish. And the advisory that was done suggested that eating migratory fish was not likely to result in adverse effects. So that actually led Ashney and I to believe that the fish were experiencing chronic exposure.
Another thing to go off of that is that while the advisory said that swallowing or touching the contaminants at the beach weren't going to cause harm to the people who were there, it does cause harm to the fish that are there, which are in turn still being eaten by humans. So while you're not getting the exposure directly through you physically like drinking beach water on accident, I guess, you're still being exposed one way or another. So our exposure assessment we stated that the fish were exposed via absorption and ingestion just from the chemicals being dumped by the harbor, building up within the sediments by the river, and in turn, getting into the water and settling at the bottom of the rivers. So they rapidly accumulate contaminants from both routes of exposure. The fish do, particularly their gills and viscera. So the gills are full of blood vessels. So when the fish breathes by taking water into its mouth, it forces all of this water and everything through the gill passages. So as the water passes over those super thin walls of the gills, oxygen is dissolved and it moves into the blood and travels to the fish's cells. Because of how easily things diffuse through the gills and how thin the walls are, contaminants are able to enter the exact same way. And so they enter the bloodstream of the fish a lot more easily. The viscera are the internal organs in the body of the fish, especially those in the abdomen, so in particular the intestines. So the pollutants would be ingested and then absorbed through the intestines, which in turn would be traveling throughout the entire body of the fish.
So, due to the majority of these contaminants settling within the sediments of the river, some of the local fish, like we talked about before, carp, They're essentially bottom feeders, so they're getting a double dose of exposure because they're eating like small insects that may be close to the sediments of the river, and they're also absorbing the contaminants through the water. And also, because of the small home ranges of these local species, they're consistently exposed to these pollutants. So, because they have small home ranges, they're literally staying within that same area throughout their life, meaning that they're consistently exposed.
Yeah, so there's actually no way of not being exposed to contaminants like PCBs and DDT and everything within their bodies, which makes this such a dangerous Superfund site, I guess, for fish as well as the humans in turn, because there has been nothing done for a number of years. So obviously, the bioaccumulation is becoming pretty high within these fish, but also the fact that many communities have nothing else or no other way of getting food sources other than, small farmers who are doing fishing and everything as a way to, like, for their families to get food and everything in their bodies. So this is kind of a point where it's super dangerous having all of these contaminants just sitting here for so many years, even though it takes a good number of time for the EPA and everybody to, decide what they want to do and how they want to do it. It's kind of difficult to get everything done. So it's a 13-year remediation period, which means it's 13 years of actually getting work done on the site. But this 13 years doesn't include the time it takes to actually figure out what they need to do or like what exactly is wrong that they need to actually get some work done on.
Okay, so now for toxicity characterization. So, as we've all learned in class, toxicity usually occurs in the tissues and organs that contain lipids. So, we talked about this earlier in class. The liver is a major site for this. And many toxicants are actually altered in the body after exposure. So, it's important to note that the toxicity of the metabolites are different sometimes from the parent compounds. So one of the most common ones is DDT, and it usually metabolizes into either DDE or DDD. So to explain more about this, it's known that DDT and DDD act as xenobiotic estrogens, and so we researched this and we found that it means that they're estrogen imitators, so they essentially cause endocrine disruption. But DDE, which is another metabolite, is actually an anti-androgen. So it's a testosterone blocker. So both of the metabolites are causing some form of endocrine disruption, but the way they go about it is very different. So it's important to note that when they're looking at the contaminants that are entering the bodies, because the parent compound could be very different from what it is once it's been metabolized through the body.
It also said that for the fish specifically, they haven't done enough studies on the Portland Harbor specifically to see which form of DDT is prevalent in the body, but they did state that they found all forms of DDT. So there was just DDT as well as DDE and DDD, as well as some of the smaller, lesser known DDT metabolites that were found within these fish. So obviously, this organochlorine or this pesticide is affecting the fish in a variety of ways, which aren't being documented as much, since obviously they're endocrine disruptors. So they're actually affecting the fish in a variety of ways. It also said that for the humans who consumed it, for the humans who consumed the fish, DDE was being present in the body. So it's really prevalent for testosterone blockers. So they had an advisory out for the Native American community that lived around the harbor that were consuming the fish on a regular basis, that they should limit specifically eating these fish because many of the men in the area might be having DDE, which is a testosterone blocker in their system on a regular basis. All right.